Blender is great, mostly. However, we all know there are one or two pain points in Blender where it really embraces its unique individual wild nature and does things in a way that doesn't always make sense or feel like the best solution. One of those areas for me is how we create and assign IDs. For those unfamiliar, an ID is a solid, unique color, often using in other programs such as Nuke, Photoshop, Substance Painter for selecting specific areas of an image. It's also just a cool way for making interesting-looking pop art too. However, for those working in film and VFX, the need to be able to quickly assign color IDs is a very important step in the workflow. And yes, I know we have cryptomats and such tools, but compared to other DCC programs, the workflow in Blender is a little more involved than it needs to be. The conception of the tool came from my own frustration when working on a specific project where I needed to create very specific IDs based on specific distances. Digging into Blender, it became apparent this was no simple task. So I decided to build a tool that would solve the problem and turn it into a few simple clicks. The Color ID Composer is a Blender add-in tool intended to unify a bunch of tools into a single place that provide the user with multiple ways to assign IDs to the scene with varying options to control how the IDs are assigned, such as using axis direction, distance from the camera, FOV, varying selection methods, and more. I really wanted to ensure I packed as many features into the add-in as possible that would hopefully ensure the process of assigning IDs is as quick and easy as possible. When generating materials for many objects and doing this many times, you quickly build up a large list of materials floating around in the background. This over time can make Blender very unstable. In testing the add-on, I had over 20,000 materials at one point, so that made me think I need a quick means of deleting them. You will see 3 buttons for deleting materials located at the top in the danger zone: Delete materials from scene, Delete materials from selected, and Purge unassigned materials. The first button, Delete materials from scene, is more to provide a clean slate prior to adding IDs. This will remove all materials from the scene and remove all material slots too from all object types. The second button, Delete materials from selected, will do the same, but for selected objects only. The third button, Purge unassigned materials, will purge unassigned materials. This is intended to remove rogue materials after assigning your IDs. Note that both buttons will purge the orphan data list. For those unfamiliar, when you delete things from Blender, they don't really get deleted. They simply move into a hidden place called orphan data. You have to manually purge this list to truly delete the unwanted content. So every so often, I find it's a good idea to hit the purge button to clean up the scene a little and keep things running smoothly. Assign color IDs to all. This button does pretty much what it says with varying ways to control the operation. The default assigns random, unique emissive color IDs to all individual objects in the scene. Use contrasting colors. Selecting this option will bump up the color contrast a little to give more visual separation. Use shading. This option will assign principled BSDF materials in place of the default emissive materials. Selected only. Enabling this will focus the material assignment to the selected objects only. Limited materials assigned. This number will impose a limit on number of materials that will be randomly assigned to all the objects in the scene. Let's continue to demonstrate this tool in action. Add and Remove Override. This is an option that leans in favor of a non-destructive approach to assigning IDs. The way this works is by creating a material called Unique Color Override. If you inspect this material closer, you can see it uses a color ramp to select and assign the varying colors. You can move the color values around and add additional colors to the ramp. This is good because it is non-destructive to the scene and assigns the material into the View Layer Override slot, which can then be removed to restore the scene materials. The only issue with this approach is the limited range of color IDs that can be used, so you might end up with IDs in a large scene that are the same or very similar. Depending on the task, this might not be an issue, however, in some instances where you have a large scene and must have unique IDs, then this might not be the best approach. For further clarity, an override material is a single material that overrides every object in the scene. This is useful because it protects the underlying materials and does not delete or remove them. For example, if you have a complex scene with many materials, and you wish to render the scene, for example, with a single glossy material, and then restore the scene back to the previous materials, this is the solution for performing that kind of task. Assign material by poly count. This operation will assign IDs based on object poly count. The values will range from blue, which represents the high poly objects, to red, which represents the low poly objects. Note the operation does not account for modifiers. For example, objects with subdivide modifiers would be evaluated as their base poly count without modifiers. In this instance, the modifiers would need to be applied. Let's continue to demonstrate this tool in action. Color ID by parent. This operation will assign color IDs to parent objects and their associated child objects with a gradient falloff down the hierarchy. Let's continue to demonstrate this tool in action. Assign color IDs to selected. This operation allows you to assign color IDs to the current selected objects only. Let's continue to demonstrate this tool in action. Assign color IDs by axis. The purpose of this operation is to assign a gradient transition along a single axis from red to blue across all objects in the scene. Color ID by proximity. This operation will take the current selected object and assign a gradient transition from red to blue, from the closest to the furthest object from the selected. Assign color IDs by camera. The purpose of this operation is to assign IDs using the camera as a point of reference. Clicking this without enabling the below options will assign IDs to the objects in the scene using a gradient transition from the position of the camera to the further object in the scene. Selected objects only. This option will limit the assigned IDs to the current user selected objects when performing the Assign Color IDs by Camera operation. Only in camera view. This operation will limit the assigned IDs to the active camera field of view, FOV note. You may need to increase the FOV to around 10 to 20% to accommodate larger objects along the edge of the frame. FOV, field of view, margin. This will expand or contract the selection within or outside the current FOV, based on a value of 0–100% relative to the FOV. Select non-unique color objects. This operation will search through the scene and select objects that are defined as none-unique. This means objects that have the same RGB value as another object. The purpose of this operation is to ensure the scene contains unique color IDs, allowing you to select objects with the same RGB values, so you can then assign new IDs using the previous tools. Let's continue to demonstrate this tool in action. Select by color. This operation allows you to select other objects with the same RGB value as the current selected object only. Randomly select objects. This operation will randomly select objects in the scene equal to the percentage value. Let's continue to demonstrate this tool in action. Set background color. This operation allows you to select and assign a background color to the scene environment. Let's continue to demonstrate this tool in action. Select by material. This operation will select all other objects with the same material as the current user selected object. Selected objects only. This option will limit the Assign color IDs by axis to the current user selected objects. Select axis. This option will allow the user to determine which axis the Assign color IDs by axis operation is performed on. Assign color IDs to collections. This operation will assign color IDs based on collections. It will assign a unique color per collection, and all objects within that collection will receive the same color. Note that a gradient transition will occur throughout the nested collections to visually indicate the depth of the collections. Depth. This value determines how deep the operation will assign IDs. For example, If you only wanted to assign IDs to objects in the top-level collection, then you would use a value of 1. If you simply wanted to ensure all objects received IDs, then use a value that is equal to the deepest collection. Let's continue to demonstrate this tool in action. I would consider the operations in this add-in to be mostly destructive. It's best to duplicate the scene you're working on and save it as a new scene specifically for assigning IDs. This way you can mess up the scene, delete materials, and so forth without concern. There is an override material generator in the add-in. However, the nature of how this sets up a material provides limited color variations. So while good for scenes with less objects, might be less good for scenes with large amounts of objects. Though it's worth testing the override first, as this would be a non-destructive approach. Assign black and white. This operation will assign a white ID material to all selected objects and automatically assign a black ID material to all other objects in the scene. Select by material. The Select by Material operator will simply select all objects in the scene that share the same material as the current selected object. Geometry types. The geometry types are a means of filtering the object in the scene while using the tools throughout the interface. Simply enable or disable specific object types to omit or include them in the operations.